The sound of snapping twigs echoed in the thick, moonless night as Emma crept through the forest, her flashlight beam flickering weakly against the oppressive darkness. The woods were unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of leaves beneath her boots and the soft whisper of wind brushing through the branches. But then a whisper, a voice, emerged from the silence. Faint, almost like a breath in her ear. "You shouldn't be here." Emma froze, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. She spun around, the flashlight beam dancing wildly over the gnarled trees. But there was nothing, no one, just shadows stretching into the endless black. She tried to shake it off. "Just my imagination," she muttered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her doubt. Taking a deep breath, she continued, but the feeling of being watched lingered, gnawing at the edge of her mind. Emma had come to these woods for solitude, hoping to escape the chaos of her life in the city. A cozy cabin, nestled deep in the forest, seemed like the perfect retreat. But now, as the night closed in, she wondered if the isolation she craved might have been a terrible mistake. Her cabin finally came into view, a small, weathered structure barely visible in the pale glow of her flashlight. She fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking, and hurried inside, locking the door behind her. The moment she stepped in, the temperature dropped, and an unsettling chill filled the air. Something didn't feel right. She turned to the old cracked mirror near the door and caught a glimpse of something, or someone, standing behind her. A dark figure, barely visible, but definitely there. She whipped around, but there was nothing. Just the empty room, bathed in the cold glow of the moon filtering through the window. She backed away, her breath shallow. "Get it together, Emma," she whispered to herself, but the dread gnawed deeper. Something was wrong with this place. And then she heard it again, this time clearer, more insistent. "You shouldn't be here." The next morning, Emma awoke to an overcast sky and the heavy scent of damp earth. The events of the previous night felt like a dream, a strange, unsettling dream. But the unease lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if the woods themselves were alive, observing her every move. She decided to take a walk to clear her mind, hoping the fresh air and daylight would dispel her growing paranoia. As she wandered deeper into the forest, the trees grew denser, their branches intertwining like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. The deeper she went, the more the air seemed to thicken, and the whispers started again, faint at first, then growing louder. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make out the words. Suddenly, she stumbled upon something peculiar, a circle of stones, old and weathered, arranged in a perfect ring. In the center, the ground was bare, the earth darker than the surrounding soil, as if it had been scorched. A sense of foreboding washed over her, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. "Don't step inside," a voice warned, loud and clear this time. Emma jumped, spinning around, but there was no one there. Her heart raced. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It felt real, too real. She hurried back to the cabin, the whispers following her, their tones urgent, frantic. As she approached the cabin, something caught her eye. A figure, a man, stood near the edge of the woods, watching her. His face was obscured by shadow, but she could feel his eyes on her, cold and unblinking. She blinked, and he was gone, as if he had never been there. That evening, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The figure she'd seen earlier haunted her thoughts. Who was he? Why was he watching her? The questions swirled in her mind, but no answers came. As dusk settled, there was a knock on the door, sharp and unexpected. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen another soul since she arrived, and she wasn't expecting visitors. Cautiously, she opened the door, and there stood an elderly man, his face lined with age and something darker, fear. "You need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "These woods, they're not safe." Emma stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "The whispers," he said, his voice barely above a whisper itself. "They're not just in your head. They belong to them, to the ones who've been here far longer than any of us. And they don't like it when someone trespasses." "Trespasses?" she repeated, her blood running cold. He nodded gravely. "There are places in these woods that were never meant to be disturbed. Sacred places. You must have stumbled upon one." "The stones," Emma whispered, remembering the circle she had found earlier. The old man's eyes widened with horror. "You need to go. Tonight. Before it's too late." But Emma hesitated. Part of her wanted to laugh it off as some crazy superstition, but the fear in the man's eyes was real, palpable. Before she could respond, the man turned and disappeared into the woods, leaving her standing in the doorway, her heart pounding. That night, the whispers returned. Louder, closer. Sleep eluded her. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind against the windows sent her heart racing. The whispers were relentless now, filling the cabin with their eerie, disembodied voices. She covered her ears, but it didn't help. The voices seemed to come from inside her mind, urging her to leave, warning her of something she couldn't see. And then the scratching started. It was faint at first, a soft scraping sound coming from the walls. Emma held her breath, listening. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if something, or someone, was trying to claw its way inside. She bolted upright in bed, her hands trembling. "This can't be real," she whispered, but the fear was all too real. She grabbed the flashlight from her nightstand and shined it toward the sound. The walls were bare, no signs of scratches or damage, but the sound persisted, growing louder, more insistent. Desperate, she ran to the door, but before she could reach it, the cabin plunged into darkness. The power had gone out. The cabin was suffocating in the dark. Emma's flashlight flickered as if something was draining the life out of it. The scratching, the whispers, the cold, they all closed in around her. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoed outside. Emma froze. Someone, or something, was approaching the cabin. She inched toward the window, peering out into the darkness. There, standing at the edge of the tree line, was the same figure she'd seen before. The man. But something was different now. His face, pale and gaunt, was twisted in an expression of agony, his eyes hollow and dark. He lifted a hand, pointing directly at her. Her heart raced as she backed away from the window. She needed to get out of there, but where could she go? The woods were a maze, and every path seemed to lead deeper into the unknown. The front door rattled as if someone was trying to force it open. She couldn't stay in the cabin any longer. Grabbing only her flashlight and keys, Emma bolted out the back door and into the woods. The moment she stepped outside, the whispers intensified, swirling around her like a storm. The cold air bit at her skin as she ran, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The trees seemed to close in, their twisted branches reaching out as if trying to grab her. Every step felt like a struggle, the weight of the forest pressing down on her, making it harder to move, harder to breathe. And then she saw it, the circle of stones, just ahead. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo as she approached the ring, her legs trembling with exhaustion and fear. Something, some force, was pulling her toward it, urging her to step inside. Emma stopped just at the edge of the circle, her heart pounding in her chest. The air around the stones seemed to shimmer, like heat rising from the ground, though the night was freezing cold. She could feel the pull, but something inside her screamed not to step forward. And then, she saw them. Figures, shadowy, indistinct, standing within the circle. Their eyes, empty and soulless, were fixed on her. They whispered her name, over and over, their voices blending into the night. One figure, taller than the rest, stepped forward, its hand outstretched. Emma recoiled in terror, stumbling backward. "What do you want from me?" she cried, her voice trembling. The tall figure tilted its head, its face still shrouded in shadow. "We are the ones who were forgotten, the ones who belong to the woods." The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The whispers, the voices, the strange occurrences, they were the spirits of those who had been lost to the forest. Spirits who were bound to the woods, unable to leave. Desperation filled her. Emma knew she had to get away, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly around her. The figures closed in, their whispers filling her mind with confusion and fear. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift and tremble as if the earth itself was trying to trap her. In a last-ditch effort, she turned and ran, her legs burning with exertion, the cold air stinging her lungs. But no matter how far she ran, the whispers followed, the shadows moving with her, never allowing her a moment of peace. Suddenly, the figure of the old man appeared before her. "I told you," he whispered, his voice filled with sorrow. "You should have left." Before she could respond, the ground beneath her feet gave way, and she tumbled down a steep embankment, the world spinning around her. When Emma awoke, she was back at the cabin. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the whispers had fallen silent. She sat up, her body aching from the fall, and looked around. The cabin was different, older, more decrepit, as if it had been abandoned for years. The walls were covered in thick layers of dust and cobwebs, and the furniture was rotting away. Her heart raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Had she been dreaming? Was any of it real? And then she saw it, her reflection in the mirror, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and dark, just like the figure she had seen in the woods. A scream tore from her throat as she realized the truth. She hadn't escaped the woods. She was one of them now. The forest was quiet again. The whispers had faded into the background, but they were never truly gone. They lingered in the trees, in the wind, in the darkness. And now Emma was part of that darkness, her soul bound to the woods, forever lost. She had become the watcher, the one who would whisper warnings to those who dared to enter the forest, just as the spirits had whispered to her. But no one ever listened. They never listened. To those who wander the woods at night, beware the whispers. They are not just the wind or your imagination. They are the voices of the lost, the forgotten, the ones who can never leave. And if you hear your name being called, run. Run before it's too late. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to check out our next terrifying tale on the channel, Horror Stories to Keep You Up All Night. Click on the end screen to dive into more eerie tales.